Hey guys, welcome to the Honest Reflection Podcast. And here we want to help you be honest about your relationship with God. I'm your host, Cody, with my co host, Nick. How's it going, Nick?
Hey Cody, I'm good. I'm doing good this week. It's good to be with you again, and I'm looking forward to discussing some more of God's Word with you and encouraging us to reflect on our service. We're so thankful for your support. For those who have reached out to encourage us, we appreciate that as always. If you don't mind taking the time to share with those you think might benefit from it, and send us any feedback that you might have, we would really, really appreciate that. Cody, what aspect of love are we going to be talking about this week?
So, we're going to be rounding out our conversation on the first fruit of the Spirit, love. And today we're specifically talking about love for your family. And I want to make sure that we understand this topic in the most broad sense. Okay. When we say family, we're talking about spouses, children, parents, aunties, uncles, nephew, all those groups, right? We're supposed to love our family, but sometimes we struggle to love our family. And I think oftentimes we just don't have quite we're not as alert towards the needs, the necessity of loving our family. I know also some people have had really bad family experiences that kind of factor into their inability to love as well. Whatever the case may be, we're conscious of all that, but we want to try to give everyone the tools to do what we can on our side to make sure that we have loving relationships with our families. And so, Nick, today I really want to lean on your seniority because you've been doing these things longer than I have, but also because you've said some really, really profound things in our conversations recently.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate this concept, and it's really important to me. I don't know that I love being the senior person yet. I'm not quite there in my life, but I do think there's some things that we can use and apply when we think about this aspect. Because really, if you think about it, for a follower of Jesus, loving our family is an outgrowth of loving our neighbor as ourselves. And that's one of those great commands. That's what we talked about last week when we looked at that story. The story of the Good Samaritan, how do we use that? If we're going to show love for our neighbor, then how much more should we show love for our family? These are the relationships that we spend the most time with during any given week that know us the best and we know them. And so, in this relationship, this special relationship, this close relationship, we have, I think, a special obligation to work on that, to work on ourselves, to work on those relationships, to show the love of Christ and treat our family even as we're supposed to treat our neighbor. Like that, those two things look the same when it comes to our service in the Lord. But as you mentioned a couple of weeks ago, when we were talking about loving our brethren, familiarity can breed contempt. And we don't want that to be the case ever. And I don't think anybody wants that to be the case. But I think sometimes what I mean by that, and I think what you were meaning by that too, is we just get to know each other so well. Maybe we become complacent or we become annoyed or we just kind of overlook that relationship because we are with them all the time. And so we have to work extra hard to make sure we're seeing the need to show love and not let the annoyance of living with or knowing someone so well that we overlook the aspect of showing love when we tell them we love them all the time. And these are the people that we say we love the most, right?
Yeah, I mean, all that's super helpful for me, and that's why I wanted to make sure that you led with that because it's helpful for me because there's really not a ton of passages that talk about love for your family. I mean, there are a few, and I'm sure that we'll get into them in our conversation today. But even a lot of those passages are still fairly general, like First Peter 3:7, live with your wife in an understanding way. Okay, I mean, I know what that says, but I don't always know what that means. Same with Ephesians 6:2, honor your father and mother. It's like, man, I want to put that into practicality. But when I think of love for my family, when I put it into that context of loving my neighbor as myself, it's super helpful. Okay, so how do I live with Macy in an understanding way? How do I love her? Well, I take into account what she desires, just like I want her to do for me. How do I honor or love my parents? Well, I make sure that they are cared for, make sure they feel cared for, just like I want them to do for me. And really, it doesn't matter how many times I've seen them, it doesn't matter how familiar I am with them, I still want their love. And so that means that I need to show that type of love to them. And so all of that is super, super helpful. Another thing that we've talked about on the show before is that love is more than a feeling or a statement. I can't just say I love you. There are requirements. There's things I'm supposed to do. And you've described love before as giving of yourself. And I love that idea in the context of loving your family.
Yeah, that's right. So I think we have to keep passages in mind that we would use when dealing with our neighbor in this same context. So if you're giving of yourself to your neighbor, right? You're going above and beyond, I think is some of the language we used last week. Like we're doing whatever is needed in that moment for that person. Then how much more do we need to be able to do that for our family, for our brothers, our sisters, our aunts, uncles, relationships that we're the closest to. Um, and so, because of that, I think we can keep in mind some of these passages that really aren't talking about family specifically, but they're talking about love and what love does. And so, for example, one of the things that came to my mind, we could think about Ephesians 4. Ephesians 4 is a passage that is talking about a couple of different things, and it leads into, oddly enough, Ephesians 5 and 6, which do talk about family. But it starts by talking about unity. And Paul writes about this concept of unity that starts with being one in God. So then we have been called with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love. And then he goes on down as he's talking about how we need to build each other up. That one of the things that he uses in explaining that, not only the people that help us with that to attain to the unity of the Spirit, but we speak the truth in love so that we can grow up in every way. So we want our family to grow up and be edified in Christ. So we speak the truth in love. In love is kind of the key phrase there, right? In the way that we do that in our context. We want to speak truth, but can you do it in love? He goes on, right, in Ephesians chapter 4. And in verse 25 through kind of the end of the chapter there, he gives a list of things that if we put on the new self, this is just who we should be. So, I mean, if we summarize it, we got to be honest. Well, yeah. In our family relationships, if we're showing love, we want to be honest to those people that we love. That's part of serving them and caring for them. What about being angry and do not sin? How many times in our family relationships do we just, for whatever reason, maybe it's just complacency or maybe it's intentional or frustration, we let our anger take control of our actions, our words, and not letting Christ lead our actions and our words. And so then, what about the way that we speak? You know, let no corrupt words come out of your mouth, but only such as is good for building up as fits the occasion, so that we can give grace to those who hear. Same thing, right? We can get so frustrated with the people that we're closest to that instead of showing love, instead of serving them, instead of giving them grace, right, which is what Paul just said, we selfishly say what we want to say instead of what's helpful to build up in the moment. It's just totally opposite of the way that maybe we are inclined to react with the people that we're closest to. I think another passage just quickly that comes to mind is Philippians 2, right? Where just Paul just says, consider others' interest as more important than your own, right? So that fits into this discussion. How are we showing love to our family? Then I think when we plug all that in, we can take Ephesians 5, 1 Peter 3, Titus. We plug all these passages in, and it's like, oh, so this service, this sacrifice, this honor, respect, all those words that get used in these family relationships, then they make sense. Because not only is, like, if we take the marriage relationship, special relationship designed by God, but also that person is a person who is made in the image of God, who we should treat that way, right? So the love our neighbor as ourself comes into play in that discussion. So even though the people are more familiar to us when we're talking about family, the love is the same love. It comes from the same source, which is our love for Jesus and what he has shown us in loving others.
Yeah, and specifically mentioning those passages, I'm sure there's probably plenty of other ones that where the context is dealing with brethren, right? Using those and thinking about it in a family is so crucial because it does show what we're supposed to be doing, right? Because I agree with you that the love for our brethren and the love for our family, it's coming from the same source, and that source is Jesus. And I really can't harp on this enough. Having the source for your love for your family, having that be Jesus and his love for you and your love for him, that is crucial to having a loving family. Because I think some of the hardest times to show love for our family, it's when we aren't feeling the love from them. Okay, when it's not, or at least when we feel like it's not being reciprocated. When the source of my love for my family is when I'm getting what I need to or what I want to get out of a relationship, man, sometimes that well's going to run dry. There are going to be times, we're all humans. There are going to be times where I'm going to feel like, man, I'm not feeling it from the other side. My kids aren't quite old enough for this yet, but I would imagine there's going to be plenty of times later on down the road where I look and I'm like, man, Ship Hay hasn't been on his best behavior lately. And so if my loving him is dependent on me just feeling that love, man, sometimes that's going to be hard. But if
Mm.
my love for them is dependent on Jesus' love for me, well, I always have that. And so I always have motivation for loving my family. So I just think that's super important. One other thing that I wanted to make sure that we thought about today was just how love for your family, it really does vary depending on the circumstances. First off, depending on the day, somebody might need a different form of love. But secondly, like loving my family is dependent on the dynamics of my family. So my loving Macy, my loving my parents, that's different than you loving Katie or you loving your parents, right? And so it's going to be a little different, but I think that's a good thing. That just speaks to the differences in our relationships. So there's a difference there. I also think it can be a little bit different depending on which family member you're referring to. So my love for my children is not the same as my love for Macy and parents and so on and so forth. So we do need to recognize that each situation is going to be different. What is required of me to love my family, it may be different. But I think everything that we brought up today, it does help to bring a concreteness to this discussion.
Yeah, and I think that's why when we're showing love like Jesus, that's our motivation, right? And our attitude and our heart is really what's more in consideration, as opposed to maybe the concept that they're just cookie cutter actions that we should have in showing this love. Well, that may not be the case, but the way that we show love can come from the same heart. That same, like we've talked about compassion, we've talked about service, we've talked about who we consider as more important than ourselves. It's it's looking like Jesus and bringing that into our home. And that's why the attitudes of giving, being selfless, showing compassion are such an integral part of our ability to show love to anybody. And then especially to the people that we're closest to our family. So so take some time and let's have some honest reflection. Uh, but this week we want to have some honest reflection on our own hearts. How are we in our attitudes, in our serving? How are we showing love in these relationships? How are you doing? How have you done recently showing love? Are you bringing Christ's love into your home, or are you just leaving it at the door? What can you do to give love to the people in your life?
Yeah, I have a little bit of a thought, a challenge for our listeners. Try asking your family how well you're loving them. As long as it's this kind of theoretical thing of, hey, am I loving my family? It's hard to bring about that concreteness that I was talking about earlier. But when I go to Macy and I say, hey, how am I loving you? Am I doing a good job at that? Well, now that brings something tangible to the discussion. Now I can say, okay, hey, look, these are the things that are going well. These are the things that may not be going well. So if we are really trying to be honest in our reflection, I think we need to lean on our family members to let us know how we're doing here. Well, guys, thank you for listening to the Honest Reflection podcast. We hope that we've given you some motivation to love your family. We hope that you enjoyed this episode. Now, next week, we are moving on to the next fruit of the Spirit, joy. Can't wait to see you next week.